make sure that that cultural and that basic change was well handled and well received by them.
Yeah, so initially it was perceived as something that of low value for them because it was not directly coming from the business, right? So that's when we had to actually go and talk to the um, business heads, and also to our own infrastructure, uh, or development management teams, the senior managers, MDs, and partners in government, to make sure that we got the full buy-in from them, and this became
Okay.
part of our priority. So we had a bi-weekly review with the top
Hmm.
MDs and partners in IMD to make sure that this was an agenda item in every single meeting. We covered everything from a cloud migration and everything from a
Hmm.
technology risk perspective as part of the cloud migration. And what we did was we
Okay.
provided self-service dashboards for each individual senior
Hmm.
manager and their management chain to look at their overall performance. So we defined what the parameters were for success, KPIs, and we
Hmm.
basically showed them on an automated basis how to actually manage their portfolio rather than sending reports to them.
Right. Okay. You mentioned that you had a team of consultants.
Yes.
What was the team size here?
So I'm going to tell you both, right? The full-time employees and the consultants, right? So I had
Okay.
also at that point 6 people reporting to me directly, and
Okay.
those individuals had consulting teams. So at any point of time, we were anywhere between 50 and 100 consultants.
Okay. Right.
So as you can see, that I try to make sure that I have less number of direct reports so that I can manage the overall sort of high level strategy properly. And I empower my direct reports to actually do the right thing for the organization. So I'm not always involved, but I'm actually hands on enough to roll up my sleeves at the same time. So I maintain a balance between both.
Oh, that's a great aspect. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Lisa, did you develop the infrastructure technology infrastructure map roadmap here for this initiative?
Yes. So what we did was, again, in partnership with our stakeholders, we defined what was a achievable target, right?
Hmm.
So going 100% was not practical. So we went through a full list of application reviews to make sure that we can set the right target for those 3 years. And we showed them like a regular progress over that. So for the 600 plus applications, roughly 10% of them were deemed as something that we are not going to invest any time into. They were
Hmm.
end of
Okay.
they were coming end of life, right? And
Okay.
they were being replaced with the new application. But we did not just take the developer's word for it. What we did was we said, okay, if it is end of life, then
Hmm.
the end date should be very clear and it should be approved by all the stakeholders. It cannot be an
Okay.
endless cycle. So we got approval
Right.
on the end dates. In a few
Hmm.
cases, we had to get an extension, and we took
Right.
it very seriously with the stakeholders where the extension was being requested, and we made sure
Okay.
that what we call as divest is actually divest. So people are not
Right.
trying to throw things under the carpet.
Right.
So yeah, we set that as a 90% target, and before I left, we were roughly around 85% done.
Oh. Oh. You've also mentioned QA and UAT here. Have you covered that in the previous explanation,
Yes.
or is this like a okay?
So yeah, so what used to be a separate QA and UAT world, right? So everything testers were different and QA people were different, and it was a very segregated world, right? Um, at least in government sacks, that at that point of time we did have separate testers, and we were moving very rapidly towards agile, so that
Right.
testing became a part of our development cycle, and
Hmm.
both
Okay.
unit testing and integration testing, and then regression testing after that was part of the development cycle itself. But rather than having dedicated people just do testing, we were coaching
Yeah.
people on the development side to learn testing and on the testing
Okay.
side to learn development. So
Right. Okay.
trying to develop them into what we call a T-shaped organization, where the horizontal is basically the breadth of skills and the vertical is
Hmm.
the depth of skills
Oh.
across the teams.
Right. And did you deploy any new technologies or tools here? Can you mention the names?
So there are a number of tools I can definitely sort of dig it out. The focus was more on practices rather than tools,
Okay.
right?
Right.
The reason I called that out was in general in banking, and I can say that now even more, there are
Mhm.
way too many tools we have, and there's a
Okay.
lot of overlap between the tools, right? The biggest challenge
Right.
we face is how do we make sure these tools can integrate well, and we are not
Hmm.
providing our customers with too many interfaces, which is also a problem.
Okay. So we're just going to mention the tools and technologies that are relevant
Yeah,
to the job
yeah,
description. Yeah.
right. So
We're just
I'm going to send you a sort of a list of names, right? So, I mean, from an infrastructure development perspective, Python is a key aspect, right? It's not the only one,
hmm.
but we use Python very heavily. In my previous
Okay.
role in Goldman, Java was used very heavily, right, by our developers because the
Oh,
business applications are more Java, infrastructure applications are more Python,
okay.
right?
Perfect.
So, as an example, in JP Morgan for the infrastructure development for
Hmm.
APIs and microservices, we use tools like Apigee, and we
Okay.
use um, yeah. So I'm going to send you the full list, right? So
Okay.
we had
I'll yeah. Uh,
yeah.
please send that after the call. Yeah.
So we also use Ansible for our microservices.
Okay. So the previous role here is manager for America's data center engineering.
Yeah.
Um, so what was this initiative about?
So yeah, I'm going to change that, right? So it was actually a product manager role, right? So
Okay.
and that actually started as a manager role in Americas, and it became a global role, right? So I'm going to send you that updated resume that has that, right? There are two
Okay.
specific aspects of the product. So here's the
Mm.
problem statement. So we have our internal cloud team, right? And now, so just to be clear, right, this role was before the IMD technology role, which was investment management division. So I was
Okay.
this role was part of the GTI, which is Global Technology Infrastructure Organization, which provided basically the data center and the facilities as part of that, right?
Okay.
So the internal cloud team was a client to my team, a customer to my team.
Right.
On a quarterly basis, we used to provide them with racks of servers, network, storage, equipment, right?
Mhm.
Based on a very clearly defined cycle of demand. So what the cloud team used to do is interface with all the business divisions, make sure that they can understand their capacity requirements for the next 3 months, and translate that
Mm.
into this is the cloud requirement from a data center perspective. So what we did
Okay.
was my problem statement was after we got that requirement, we used to run around and start collecting teams together to sort of stitch
Mm.
it together all the time. And it was a very reactive exercise, and it used to be very inefficient because we used to rediscover the wheel every time. So what
Mm.
we took a step back was as saying, this is the 80th, 90% case where we are getting the same type of request, right? So let's actually put this into a proper modular concept. And modular data centers were getting very popular at that time. So we
Right.
designed a data center module, right? And we
Mm.
made sure that each rack, each module, so each module was around 14 racks. Each rack was
Okay.
around 40 single-use servers, and we defined how those servers should be laid out, how the cabling should be laid out. It was a very standard IKEA-like design, right?
Mm.
I'm sure you have seen the IKEA catalogs, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah, I have. I have.
so it's a repeatable framework, right? So that's the whole concept. So I introduced the IKEA concept there, and we said why we don't need to rediscover the entire design every time we get a new request. So let's customize at least 90% of our requests and give them on a
Mm.
very streamlined, consistent basis. So we created this data center resource pool concept where we translated what the cloud team needed in terms of compute resource pools into
Mm.
specific um, data center racks and its
Right.
specific compute capacity, specific storage capacity. So they got a very predictable delivery every single quarter. So that was a change for them. We became a
Oh,
truly supply chain like environment. So although these things were internal to government, we behaved with each other like we are vendors to each other or suppliers to each other, and not in a
okay.
bad way. Just to make sure that basically all of this is data defined, data driven. So
Right.
the rack information, the server information, port information, cabling information was all encoded in a product catalog, and the product catalog was matched to the inventory. So you could
Mm.
have basically just-in-time provisioning. You would know that in my rack number 405, in space number 20, I have an open spot for a server,
Oh,
and you don't have to go to the data center to find that out.
yeah.
So that was a product we
So
did develop.
like a highly efficient system compared to the last one. So the stakeholders here, was there any challenge in understanding their needs? Were there any hurdles in that?
Yeah. So the stakeholders were both in my organization and also in my customer organization, right? The
Hmm.
customer organization was very software driven. It was very sort of advanced compared to
Okay.
where we were. So obviously
Okay.
their expectations were much higher than what we could deliver, right?
Oh, right.
So
Definitely.
initially, while we were trying to sort of like be very reactive, we had to sit back and actually talk to the stakeholders and say, look, we have to be working here as one team, and
Hmm.
we had to demonstrate what was practically achievable and what was not.
Right.
And
Hmm.
after, I'm going to say, a couple of months of back and forth, we came to a good partnership agreement where
Right.
now we were not sort of justifying why we are late, right? And
Oh.
now the senior managers were sort of firmly behind us and sort of
Hmm.
explaining their roadmap in conjunction with ours. So these we used to go into their customer meetings and give the overall sort of delivery roadmap in a very proactive manner. And obviously, we got a lot of questions about why so
Hmm.
slow, why does it take so much time? So what we did was we also organized some data center visits for the people, because as you may
Hmm.
imagine, most of the people have not seen a data center. How does it look inside, right?
Yeah.
And we are talking about 500,000 square feet of at least of area. So when they
Hmm.
saw what we had constructed, what were the limitations, what were the heat and capacity and air conditioning requirements, um,
Hmm.
their minds were blown, right? Because they're not seeing all that environment. So what seems very simple from a compute requirement, I get a CPU, to this is
Hmm.
how it runs in a data center, right? Is quite a
Hmm.
journey for someone who doesn't know what a data center looks like. So we organized a lot of these tools. That definitely gave us a lot of credibility in terms of how well the data centers were run with how
Yeah.
like very less number of people. So at any point of time in our data centers, we had less than 10, sometimes less than 5 people, because we did not need people moving in and around the data center itself. So the level of automation, the level of inventory checks, the level of organization we had done in the
Yeah.
data centers was very, like, it was commendable from the business perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great explanation. Got a lot of information for that from that.
Mhm.
Um, right. So in the next point, you mentioned that you have the global responsibility for driving transparency through tool automation. You mentioned capacity management here, and I was wondering, is this technology capacity or like team capacity, skill capacity?
It was technology capacity, right?
Okay.
So basically, being part of infrastructure capacity management is a very, very key aspect. Um,
Hmm.
so I think you're referring to the server provisioning role that I had. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
No,
So
no,
this is basic.
it's a previous one. America's data center engineering one. It's the second point.
America's data center capacity management. I think you can probably skip that. It's probably not that important in the
Okay.
whole scheme of things.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. We can just
So the server
and
provisioning
then
one is a little more sort of impactful.
okay. Let's talk about that then.
Okay. So
Hmm.
my role was global server provisioning for all the server provisioning requests in the firm in Goldman,
Hmm.
right? So that ranges from like single Java process servers up to database servers and clusters of servers, right? So multiple varieties. Now, what
Okay.
looks like a server provisioning team, it is a combination of a lot of underlying teams. So roughly we
Hmm.
had 26 different teams that we used to interface with because of difference of skill sets, difference of architecture and design and all those things. So
Hmm.
our effort was to sort of combine these 26, what these teams did, the 26 teams did, into a single flow, end to end. Right?
Right.
So roughly this was divided into when. So the whole premise of this was to make sure that our internal customers can get the same or better level of service as
Hmm.
compared to when they order from Amazon. Right? So
Okay.
a- as a customer in Amazon, you go to your shopping cart, you can see basically when things are being delivered. Amazon delivers it on time, so you don't double guess them, right? So we had
Right.
issues right from the beginning where we did not have enough visibility to the customers, right? So
Okay.
we went into a lot of forums. We explained to them the difference between ordering stuff for your own sake, where you have your
Hmm.
own wallet, versus
Right.
ordering on behalf of the business, which is the firm's wallet, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it roughly used to take us anywhere between 6 to 9 months, worst case, to
Okay.
deliver service to our businesses, which was
Yeah.
a very very bad SLA. Even if I can call this an SLA, it was not an agreement. So going from there, we had to actually sort of break down the entire flow and understand where the problems were. So the initial set of problems were around the number of approvals, the number of follow-ups, the amount of time it took for the requesters to get the necessary business approvals. And this is because
Hmm.
of the fact that we have a business wallet.
Okay.
We have a business wallet to manage rather than our own wallet. So we had to explain to them that if you require service in the next 2, 3, 4 months, it is better
Hmm.
to inform your own management team, get their approval ahead of time, and only
Right.
submit the request once you have the approval, not use the
Oh,
process to seek approvals.